Hey everyone, Chelle here with season 2 of Show and Tell with Chelle. My first guest to kick off season 2 is an award-winning author screenwriter. He and I will be discussing his award-winning book, Born for the Game, and his mission to change the image of Italian Americans created by Hollywood. So stick around. Joining me now is award-winning author, screenwriter, Mike DeLucia. Glad to have you, Mike.
Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. Finally, we're able to get together and do this. Well, kind of get together and do this.
Right.
Something always happens to come up, but we finally did it. So that's great.
Months, right? Months in the making.
Yes. So tell me, how long have you been writing and when was your first book published?
Now I'm going to go way back for a bit. First thing I ever wrote was a poem. I was like 18 years old. The love of my life broke up with me. I was beside myself in grief, and I had never written anything before. I had written a poem about love, and that was the first thing I wrote. And then when I was started off as an actor and got married young to that lady after, because we got back together again after the poem, The Power of Writing. And being married and a career and a house and all those things just did not. So I got this great idea, as you could see my poster behind me of Rocky. I was going to become the next Rocky, and I was going to write a movie, and I was going to star in it, and I wasn't going to sell it unless I was it. That was my thinking. That was solid ground. I had never written anything before, and that was the first thing I wrote. Hand wrote it actually in about 1983.
Wow, 1983. So you go way back.
Oh yeah. And then
Interesting.
and then I hadn't, and then there's a big long history in between, which, the very first book I published, that was a screenplay. And the very first book I published was around 9 years ago, 8 years ago. And that was the first thing I had done. Independent, went on my own, learned as I went.
And from there, you've been winning awards left and right for all your books.
Yes, I have. I was actually on TV with that book. The very first book I wrote was called Boycott the Yankees, a call to action by a lifelong Yankees fan.
Uh-oh. Did you have a lot of backlash from that? Boycott the Yankees?
I did, but I'm a Bronx native. I grew up in the Bronx, love the Yankees, still do. And I just was at that period where, this romantic view of baseball. When I was a kid growing up in the 60s and the 70s, we would go down to Yankee Stadium by train. Mom would give us like literally $2, and that would be enough for the train, for 75 cents for the seats. And then it just got so much about greed and ego that I wrote this book, because I said I want to take the stadium back, and that was the first book I had written. So
fabulous. So now, your highly rated, award-winning book, Born for the Game, recently won top honors at the Literary Titan Awards. Congratulations, Mike.
thank you so much.
Born for the Game keeps hitting home runs way out of the ballpark for all of your readers. Tell me about the book and what inspired you to write it.
All right, Chelle, let's go all the way back to the 70s again. My older brother, Joe, tells me a story about this guy. He said, there was this blind guy who tripped over his dog's water bowl, smashed his head into the radiator, and when he woke up, he could see. And he said, that's a true story. And, well, I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. And, hey, older brother Joey said it was true. So I believed it, but it started this thing in my head about, wow, so if you hit your head, maybe it can spark something, some potential that you have, or something that's hidden in there. And I started this story about this character named Benny, and who was this guy who should have been a famous baseball player, but he was just short of it. But he lived, eat, read the sport. It was kind of like The Natural, but it was written before The Natural. And he gets hit in the head, in a car accident, and he becomes this superstar at like a later age, at like 36 or 37. And that story morphed inside my brain for the last 45 years. And it started off with Benny and with the blind man. And by the end, it changed dramatically into uh, the newest and most dynamic protagonist, Ryan Stone, the first female who makes it into Major League Baseball.
Female. That's
Yes.
interesting. Okay.
And she, there's nothing to do with hitting your head. That all of that went away. But the crux of the story remained. What does it take to be the greatest at anything? Everybody has that fantasy. We all fantasize about being the greatest at one thing. And the way it's written, it's possible. You know, and I always say, well, if it's possible, why not me? Why not you? Why can't it be done? So again, if you read the book, and that's what a lot of people are saying, a lot of people are saying it's plausible. The way it's written, it could happen. And I do think it's going to happen. I do think we are going to have, you know, a first female in Major League Baseball, probably within the next 10, 15 years. I think it'll be, you know, probably as a pitcher, maybe as a relief pitcher, but I see it happening. But anyway, yeah, so Born for the Game was written as a screenplay. I always write a screenplay first, and then I adapt the novel.
Now that's
That's,
interesting. Don't you authors usually write the book and then it goes to screenplay?
you know, maybe that's the way everybody does things, but you
You're
know,
unique, Mike.
I here's why. First of all, my greatest ambition is to be a screenwriter. Going all the way back to the old days, I want to be in the movies. Not that I have to be in them anymore, but as long as I'm part of it, I love the movies. So, and it's much harder to write a screenplay than it is a novel. Because in a screenplay, you are locked in, you're handcuffed to 120 pages. And that's, you know, if you are because it's a minute a page. And if you're a first time writer, they're not going to accept anything. They'll throw it away. They're going to throw it away anyway, but they'll throw it away if it's more than 120 pages because it's too long. Even people, you know, movies are shorter these days. So you're locked into that. And you also have to write with budget in mind. You know, how can we utilize, you know, characters effectively? Because they're always looking at money. They're looking at money. How much is going to cost for this movie to be made? Whereas you're writing a novel, you can go anywhere. You can have scenes with thousands of people in it. You can have the most elaborate sets and you can do anything you want. So I start with this tight concept and then I branch off into, you know, characters' thoughts and so on and so forth. So it's easier to go to me from screenplay to novel. So
Now this character Ryan in your book, Born, um, it took a lot of perseverance, right?
mhm,
And cleverness to get from where she was to where she is.
mhm.
And that could be a huge inspiration for a lot of people, especially women.
She is a trailblazing, badass female who enters this world that's completely dominated by men. And when she is there, she is prepared for everything. She has been prepared from before she was born. That's the story title is Born for the Game. And the catchphrase, you know, for it is, what do a 4'5" billionaire, a Japanese grand karate master, and has been Hall of Fame pitcher have in common? They create the greatest baseball player of all time, and her name is Ryan. So it's the collaboration, especially of her father, who is this guy named Phineas, who's got dwarfism, who loves baseball. He starts off in the foster care system. He's poor, he's beaten, he's all of those things, and he has the determination, and he rises to become a billionaire. And the one thing he can't have is he can't play baseball for his beloved LA Greyhounds. And so his whole life, he's thinking about how so he can do it through his child. It's, I don't want to give too much away,
No, no,
but it's
no.
not a typical story. If you think in baseball, don't. Baseball's in the background. This is about what's in the forefront is overcoming obstacles, dreams, the depth of your choices, and how the choices that you make dictate the path of your life. There's a lot going on in this story. Um, so
You have a load of 5-star reviews, and I could see your perseverance and your determination to get this made into a movie. And I think it would be a fabulous movie.
um, and I think it's good for the times, and I didn't write it specifically, say, well, the shift is now toward uh, powerful females. The shift is now toward, um, well, I have a dwarf as one of the main characters. But, that wasn't there because I said, well, let me use, a small sector of society to demonstrate that disabilities and so on and so. It wasn't about that. It was about, somebody who loved it but couldn't do it. And I thought to myself, well, how could you not do it? And I thought, well, he's trapped. This person has to be trapped. Originally it was like a guy with elephant man disease. And I was like, no, that's a little extreme. So I brought it down to something, like that. So there's all these other, aspects in there that's not, I didn't write it because people say, well, it's a woke script, it's a very woke script. It just happened that way. And I really, Ryan Stone, she was originally a guy up until right before I wrote it, because I was looking at my story and I'm saying there are no females. This is an all male cast. And it wasn't because of that. It goes back to when I wrote Madness, the Man Who Changed Basketball. It was that. It was all guys. And I had, it was in college and I was rewriting it. And people said, the biggest critique was, this is a great story because it's a historical fiction novel that people don't know actually how basketball started. They said it's missing one thing. You need a love interest here. Like, you need a female. And that's what kind of made me conscious of the fact that, you have to have a balanced, story. You need to engage everyone, as many people as possible, and that's what makes a rich story. So I was looking at it again, and I was like, well, let me see, maybe I could make, Phineas, a female. I'm like, no, and then I said, no, I'm gonna make the main, because that, I mean, that's the greatest challenge. Now this character, this protagonist, has to overcome all kinds of obstacles, not only the physical obstacles, but the emotional and the mental. Just imagine, you know, on TV in front of 50,000 people getting struck out by a girl. There are societal implications in there that people aren't ready for just yet. They will be eventually. But
I
so
think you're right. They are not ready for that.
no.
Did you have somebody, an actress, particular actress in mind when you wrote the character of Ryan, or just should it come to being filmed and produced, I guess, go through a whole casting process, or
Not for her.
not for her? Okay.
For Phineas, I had did you see Game of Thrones?
Yes, yes.
So I had Lannister, why am I drawing a blank on his name? The dwarf.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I do.
Dinklage. So I
Yes.
had Peter Dinklage in my head the whole time I wrote it for him. But for Ryan, you know, the way I wrote her, she is physically imposing. Like, she has muscles like her washboard abs, and she's totally muscled, and she has um because her other father is this Japanese grand karate master. She's also she's also like a martial art expert, and she has these traditional Japanese tattoos that go from all the way from her right leg, up her back, down her arm. So she's got this. She's really unique in her physical appearance, and I couldn't think of anyone. I found a model online, minus the tattoos, that kind of looks like what I was thinking. She's also very smart too.
Okay. I hope, I wish you a lot of success. I hope this comes through because this would really make a fabulous movie. Really would.
It's kind of like my next step. First I wanted to get the book out, and now I'm going to start approaching people. I already sent it out to like two people,
Good.
um, but now I'm going to start over the next, once I get the audio book done for Born for the Game, because I'll do the audio. That should take another 3 weeks or so. Then I'm going to really start pushing the manuscript and try and get this made into a movie.
You go for it. Keep plugging away. I know you can get it done. Mike, what advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
Um, it's interesting. A lot of people, many people say, "Oh, I have a story." I mean, I've had modest success. You can't mention my name in a house somewhere in the Midwest, and somebody's going to say, "Oh yeah, I want to read Mike DeLucia's next book." I'm not even in that level. I'm not at that place yet. And you'd be surprised how many people come to me and say, "Hey, can you write my story? I've got a story. I've always wanted to write a book. I know I can do it." Everybody's got a story in them. Everybody. So if you want to make it into something, you must treat it like a business. Otherwise, it will never get done. The amount of discipline, I've even met people who've said, "You know what, I've written the first, 4 chapters." You have got to look at your life, and you've got to make hard decisions. You've got to look at it and say, "Okay, I'm going to take X amount of time out of my day every day, 5 to 7 days a week. And I'm going to recalculate my schedule during the day. And I'm going to figure out where I can find 3 hours, where I can find 2 hours, maybe an hour in a day, an hour and a half in the morning, maybe an hour and a half at night, maybe during your lunch period. I'm not really sure, but and it's going to mean that you might have to turn around and say, okay, well, I can't watch, TV at night. You might have to sacrifice those kinds of things. I don't watch TV really. If I do, it's just, I'm married. It's kind of social time, with my wife. We'll sit down together and watch something. When I'm by myself, I do not watch TV. I don't. I work, and that's the only way that you're going to do it. You know, Structure wise and all of those things. And if the story's going to come out, that, you won't know. But first, you've got to write it. And the only way to do it is to sit down, shut yourself off in a room. I don't care if you write to playing loud music or you write to complete silence, whatever it is that you need to do it and sit down at that computer and write until it's done. And that's the best advice I can give anyone who wants to, first write.
And stay focused and don't let all the distractions going on distract you away from what you're doing.
Yeah.
Do you believe in writer's block?
Yeah. And I've been asked before, do you get writer's block? And so far, I haven't really gotten writer's block. Maybe little stumps. Sometimes when you write, you'll write, in a day, you'll write, God, 30 pages, 20 pages. And some days you will literally spend all day writing, and you're lucky if you get a half a page. I don't know if that's writer's block, but it's certainly just, the ebb and flow of things. But yeah, no, I guess it just hasn't happened for me yet. I haven't sat down and just said, you know what, I don't know what to write about. I have so many stories, little things written down. I have a document on, my computer that just has little snippets of stories. And I've got a bunch. I don't know what I'm going to write next. I'm going to wait until at least January before I start writing again. I want to focus on my screenplays between now and then. Um, and then, I'll pick one and let it rip.
Go for it. So now, Mike, You have a mission to change the image of Italian Americans created by Hollywood.
I do.
What is that mission and what are you going to do to accomplish it? And do you feel you can change the image of Italian Americans that you feel Hollywood created?
Yes. It all started with The Godfather,
Hmm.
arguably the greatest movie of all time. Certainly you can have that argument, and after that, people fell in love with this idea of Italians and mafia. And Hollywood has only made, since that time until now, has only shown Italians in films as either mafia or the good-hearted, uneducated, uh, unrefined, plumber or, Jersey Shore type. And there's nothing, believe me, I have plenty of friends who are plumbers. I have, in the unions and all that sort of thing. And I'm not making a statement about that. I'm just saying when you just categorize a certain group of people, a large group of people by just being, this or that, um, even if you look at Friends, who was the dumb guy? Well, there was the girl too. I mean, she was a little airy, but Joey, he was, kind of, he was Italian in the thing. I don't think he's Italian in real life. Um, but anyway, so how am I going to do it? Movies are a great teacher. Oh, by the way, I'm jumping back. There's only been one film that has not demonstrated Italian as anything other than that stereotype since the late 70s, and that was Unbroken, and that was probably 10 years ago. Other because in there the main character was just he just happened to be Italian. There was no mafia, there was no, they weren't dummies or uneducated or unrefined, just happened to be Italian. So can I change it? Yeah, I do, because movies are the greatest teacher. Um, they tell the stories that we have in our minds and they educate people. I had a friend of mine who was at one of those all expense Caribbean, resorts. And she has an Italian last name. And she walked into a restaurant, and the person who was seating them saw their name, this big long Italian name, and said, "Ah, I'm going to put you guys at a special table where you make sure that you could see the doorway." You know, so Italians supposedly don't like their backs to the door because they're worried about getting shot. So she
Gotcha.
said, "And what's that supposed to mean?" He
Yeah.
said, "Well, you're Italian, and she
That's
said,
stereotyping.
"Yeah." She said, "Well, I'm insulted by that." And I said, "You cannot blame him because he has been brainwashed to think that that's okay to say and that it's funny and that maybe you like that idea because you're a mafia tough person or something."
But not
Um,
everybody thinks like that. Not everybody's stereotyping Italians as mafia.
um, it's a lot more prevalent than you may think.
Maybe.
If you see an Italian with a lot of money and a fancy car, in the back of your mind, you're judging, you're wondering, you're, is that mafia money? Especially if they're in a business, they're in a sanitation business, or they're in a construction business. It's like they're mafia, you know. So my mission is all of my stories feature Italians in major roles when they're just regular people. And that's all I want to do, because Italians are as diversified as any other nationality. We have contributed to society in every possible facet, whether it be politics or art or business or, innovators and builders and, the whole gamut. And so my goal is to just demonstrate Italians just as people. They just happen to be Italian. And that's how I intend to do it. And I have spoken to wealthy Italians who I would like to form a group with at some point, people with money and power, to be able to form a network where we have a mission of producing one film per year that features an Italian in a main role, that has nothing to do, that has everything to do with being the opposite. There is mafia movies will always exist, always, and I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with any of it, as long as it's not locked in and exclusive to just that. Italians, mafia. Even my family in Italy, and Italians in general in Italy that I know, all feel the same way. They're all behind me 100%,
You
wanting me to succeed.
you want to show Italians in another light other than the mafioso, as everybody thinks and
Well,
knows. And because again, due to, like you said, due to Hollywood and their movies depicting mafia and pretty much most of that crime, and they've always depicting that kind of thing, and you want to change that. And I understand. I could see where you're going with this, definitely.
yeah, and even the other side, if they're not that, they're the Jersey Shore, Goombas,
The Kumba.
it just, even the Green Book, which I like that book. It's a great movie. It's a great film. He was still the gun-toting, unrefined, bad grammar. Um, you know, it's the same character that Hollywood accepts for Italians. This is what Italians are. This is what we and it's wrong, especially in our society today. When I first started in acting, going back again to the 70s, I was told by all the people in the business, ethnics do not get commercials. You can only get commercials if you're blonde and blue or red haired, American. Don't even go for print ads. Don't even go because ethnics are not going to be there. So
I
we've
was
come
told
a
the
long,
same thing, Mike. I was told the
okay,
same thing.
exactly. We've come a long way. Now it's all diversity. And so I'm hoping that Hollywood follows the trend and decides to lift this ban on Italians and start to demonstrate us as actual people instead of caricatures.
Have you been doing stuff on social media regarding your feelings and how they're being depicted
I do it mostly through my book
through your
talks.
book talks? Okay.
I do book talks, and I do have. I may be addressing a group of people, an organization where I'm getting sponsored, and we're just kind of putting everything together. And it's not an Italian group; it's a business where I will be talking about how Italians are stereotyped and how it's not okay to do it. I'm being sponsored by an Italian group for me to talk because they know what I talk about, and so it's in a different state. It's in Cleveland, um, so again, when I do my book talks, that's usually how, how I begin it, especially when I'm doing Italians because I speak to a lot of Italian groups. And that's how I usually start. I start off with that, and then I get into my books.
Very interesting. And so let me ask you one other thing.
Mhm.
All of your books, I have a feeling there's always Italians in your books.
They are.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Uh,
So, like you said, that's the great way to start. And then
right,
screenplay or screenplay first, because that's what you do. And then you write your books.
right, right. Madness: The Man Who Changed Basketball is a historical fiction story, and it's about this guy by the name of Hank Luisetti, and he absolutely revolutionized basketball in the 1930s. It's an incredible story. No one knows who he is. He was one of the most famous athletes in the country at that time, but there was no NBA. So after college, there was nowhere to go. So he faded into obscurity after he did a movie. He was actually so famous that he was signed to a movie deal, and he starred in a movie with Betty Grable. He was a terrible actor. And so that one's about Italians. Being Brothers is about two brothers growing up in the Bronx in 1973. And that happens to be an Italian family. And even Born for the Game, Ryan Stone is half Italian.
Uh-huh.
So
What's your other half?
other half is
Just,
she's a Russian Jew, and she is American Indian,
I
Kiowa.
like it. I really do. You got a nice variety of ethnicity in her. I happen to be a Heinz 57 myself.
Okay.
Everybody thinks I'm either Spanish or Italian. No, I have a little bit of each in me.
I can see that. I thought you were Italian when I first saw you. You have an Italian look for sure, but I can see Spanish. I can see Jewish. I could see, um, yeah, any other day, like Romanian or Albanian or, any of those things. So Indian, I could see, there's a
I
lot
did
of
get
stuff.
cast actually as portraying an Indian in a couple, actually New York Undercover, that
Hmm.
television show back in the 90s. I
Hmm.
did.
Yeah, I
I
could
played
see
a
it.
dignitary.
Hmm. I could see it for sure.
Tell me a little about your acting before we wrap up. What have you been in, and are you still pursuing it as much as you are? Are you more, more into your script, your screenplays, and you're writing your books? What have you done with the acting?
Well, when I was a kid, it was all about sports. It was all about growing up and in the street in the Bronx. And during that time period, it was stickball, baseball, softball, football, basketball, all the outdoor things that we did. And then when I was in the seventh grade, I went to a Catholic school, and they put on a musical called Godspell. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Of
And
course.
I was going down the stairs because the teacher sent me on like a go to the principal and give her this note kind of a thing. And I heard them singing, and I opened the door and I walked in, and then they were my peers, people in my own school. And I saw that, and I'll never forget that. And I'm looking at that and I was stunned, and I said, I want to do that. And from that point on, it was sports were gone and theater was all it until, I studied in Manhattan. I studied HB Studio. I studied with Geraldine Page for a couple of years. But, as I said before, I got married very young, and, I thought I can do it all. I thought I could, have everything. But if you want to become a successful actor, you want to become a successful musician, you want to become a successful, athlete, all of those things, there's just a couple of people that make it to the top. Your girlfriend, your family, your job, everything is that. You are married to the goal of doing that. And as much as I loved acting, as much as I just, it was such a big part of me, at some point I had to let it go. I had to let it go because I had kids and I had a mortgage to pay and I had food to put on the table, and I just couldn't do everything. I thought I could, but I couldn't. Writing is a little bit easier in that sense because you can take your private time, scratch out a little bit of time, go into your room and write. Acting is a little bit tougher because you're going on auditions and you're, doing that whole,
Very
end of thing.
time consuming.
Yeah, and if you get a job and you have a job, what do you do? Take the job, take this acting job that's going to last a week or two, but then what? Give up your other job, and everybody's depending on you to pay the bills. The two just don't work.
It's very
So
difficult.
yeah,
Very difficult.
yeah, yeah.
But you have to persevere, though, if you want to be an actor or if you want to go in another direction, like you did, being an author and a screenwriter.
Mhm. Yeah. It all takes a lot of energy, and of course, if I could do it all over again, I would make different choices. But I would have gone to Hollywood right out of high school, and I would have stayed until I got what I wanted. And that's a whole other story.
No, but you could still get to Hollywood the way. Hey, you know what? Hollywood could be calling after this interview. Who knows? They could be saying, "Hey, we want to take your books and we want to make a screenplay out of them, and we want to make the movies out of them." You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I
you
do have some interest in some stuff right now, but interest is one thing. I just signed something with somebody, who
Great.
wants to pitch Madness, and I've got somebody else who wants to pitch Being Brothers. I've got two people right now, but I've heard that in the pit. Let's see what materializes. Hollywood is a house of cards. Everything's got to line up just the right way, and then the money's got to be there, and how that goes.
Exactly. I know
Yeah,
exactly how it goes,
yeah,
but it can happen. It happens for others. Why not for you? Right?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Mike, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure. And I wish you a whole lot of continued success. So you rock on and continue doing what you're doing.
I enjoyed being on your show and talking to you, and I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right.
And that's a wrap. To find out more about author-screenwriter Mike DeLucia and where you can find his books, you can go to www.booksbymikedelucia.com. Thank you, my viewers, for your continued support by watching, following, and subscribing to my channels and pages.